Hi, welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with a very, very special guest, Garrett Biss. He's a retired Marine Corps pilot, and he's dedicated to the advocacy of veterans specializing in mental health, resilience, and recovery coaching. And he has the company Diamond Mine. And Garrett, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And we're excited to hear what you have to tell us today.
Yeah, thanks, Melody. I'm so excited to be here and to join your audience. I'm excited about this conversation. I've really been looking forward to it.
Yeah, so this is great. Our for the month of April, our topic is addiction. And so we wanted to I know you talk a lot about veterans, and that's very important, veterans and addiction, and just addiction in general. What would be some things that you would like to tell our audience or share with our audience about your ideas of addiction and resilience from addiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how many hours do we have to peel back the layers of this topic? So one thing, really a focus of mine recently has been on the veteran population. So I myself am a veteran, but I also see in the veteran population that there's a much greater chance of or prevalence of addiction and mental health challenges. We talk about or think about the suicide, the challenge that we face, and that's getting a lot of attention. Unfortunately, with all the talking that we're doing about it, and the money that's invested in it, it's not making the drastic changes that we hope for. But I also see a lot of similarities between some of the struggles and challenges that veterans face. I mean, at the root of it, a lot of veterans struggle with the transition from military service. And as I mentioned to you, I recently did a TEDx talk, which looks at what I call the unspoken trauma that all veterans face. What I realize is that as a veteran transitions from the military and they lose the way that they've met basic fundamental human needs, it creates this crisis or this internal, battle or challenge that unfortunately a lot of veterans find a substance or a behavior to help numb or avoid that pain. But even through that lens, I understand that addictive tendencies is something that, I think it's part of our human nature. So when I think of addiction, I think of it in a much broader context, not just somebody who's engaged or their life has been overcome by this short list of arbitrarily selected substances or behaviors that we think of. I really like and have been inspired by the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. And one of the things I like the most is that he provides a definition of what addiction is that is much broader in scope. And I think better answers or better helps us understand what exactly is going on when somebody's life becomes overcome by a substance or behavior. And his definition of addiction is simply that addiction manifests in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure from, has a negative consequence as a result of, and yet has difficulty giving it up. And I love that definition because it helps me see that addictions can manifest and these negative consequences can manifest beyond just the, alcohol or opioids or marijuana or any of these other things that we commonly think of and get all the attention. Because at the end of the day, this behavior to be drawn to a substance that is beyond us in order to create or synthesize or relieve a feeling that's within us, this is that part of that human nature, that human behavior. So I love looking at it through this lens because it helps me realize that first and foremost, removing a substance or behavior from somebody's life, I don't consider that recovery. That can be a great first step, but that's not recovery in the sense that they're creating a life that they no longer want to escape from. It also helps me understand and see that there's a lot of people that are struggling out there. There's a lot of suffering that we experience in this human life. And there's a lot of people that are facing struggles and challenges that turn to a substance or a behavior that creates a negative consequence in their life. So the person that is coming home from work every night and they're Netflix binging because they can't face their current reality, or they're caught up in social media addiction, or they're doing any other behavior that's helping them relieve that pain temporarily and is creating a negative consequence in their life. This is a reality that's really stealing a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, a lot of contribution, a lot of impact from many more people than those who traditionally consider themselves to be struggling with addiction.
Right, right. And that's a good point, Garrett, because I think, especially at this moment, people are thinking mainly about addiction and substance abuse, but they're thinking if that's there, that if it's not there, then that'll solve the problem. And it goes a lot deeper. It's not about the drugs or the alcohol, it's about the relief that it brings. Yeah. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I have this. I'm kind of working over in my mind a general theory, or like a comprehensive theory of what leads people into this pain, into the suffering that we experience. And my biggest focus has been on the fundamental human need that we have for connection to other individuals. There's a famous TED talk by Johann Hari where he says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. So when we think about humans as creatures, we're animals. We have all the basic needs that animals do for food, water, and shelter, but we're also social creatures, and a fundamental need that we have in order to satiate this need for safety, survival, is a need for connection to other people. We're tribal creatures. We do our best when we're part of a group. And what we've come to realize more lately is that social connection is so profound that a lack of proper social connection has similar adverse health effects as smoking 15 cigarettes or drinking 6 or more alcoholic beverages every day. And this is what was shared in the recent Surgeon General's report. It'd be no surprise to anybody that if you were to smoke that much or drink that much, they would have some adverse health effects. But to realize that it's the same challenge to us as individuals when we don't have that proper social connection. There's so many things that are hardwired into us that rely on social connection to others in order for us to deal with and to manage. Whether it's the way that our body releases oxytocin when we do something together as a group, or when we share a hug. So oxytocin, one of it's, it's a bonding hormone or a bonding chemical, but it's also one of the best ways, or really the way that we deal with stress and anxiety in our life. So as the adrenaline, the cortisol start to build up, it's that release of oxytocin that helps our bodies regulate. And that connection to other individuals is something that's required in order to promote a lot of those functions that help us feel safe and secure just as we are. So connection is vital, but one of the things I see that really challenges connection is our authenticity, or our lack of authenticity, that jeopardizes the quality of those connections that we have. Because what I see is that many, many times, and for many of us, I'm sure we can think of multiple situations in our life where we've been in a situation and we had to choose between, okay, can I express myself authentically? Meaning, can I share what I think, share how I feel and ask for what I need? Or do I need to cover that part of myself, maybe wear a mask to cover my authentic self so that I can show up in a way that it doesn't jeopardize my connections? We might show up as a version of ourselves or show up in a certain way so that we can still maintain our place in that tribe or in that group. But every time we do that, every time we show up for connection, but we're hiding behind a mask, we don't receive the benefits of that connection. Instead of that oxytocin, instead of that soothing experience, we experience more stress because there's that fear. Like, what if they find out what I really think? Like, I'm biting my tongue right now, or I'm not asking for what I need. What happens if they find out what I really think? Am I going to lose that connection? And also, as we wear these masks and we show up inauthentically, whether we realize it or not, we're also sending ourselves the subtle message every time that there's something wrong with me the way that I am. So this depletes our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth. It erodes our self-confidence, our drive, our ambition, and everything else. So I really think that there's a crisis here in our society, especially with people feeling forced to show up inauthentically so that they can maintain the connections that they have. And this is, exacerbated by challenges that we see, whether it's the 24-hour news cycle that really has us in this fear state all the time, trying to navigate the groups that we're a part of, or whether it's the reality of social media as we're scrolling through it and consuming all of this content of social media. That's not a realistic perspective or a realistic lens of the world that's around us. It's a filtered lens that shows oftentimes things that are better than our current situation, which again makes us feel worse for the individual that we are. So I think this is a big challenge, and this is what I feel is really at the root of most of, if not all, challenges with addictive substances and behaviors. There's a period in time, or there's a long period, or a single experience that separates somebody from feeling safe as they authentically are, And then as they go out into the world and they go through their life trying to establish connections, which are fundamental, which we need for our survival, they find that that hole is never filled or that need is never met because of the way that they're forced to show up in the world.
Uh, that's great. That's great, and that's powerful, and so true. You know, and I think a lot of that has to do with social media too, as well. Everybody wants to look perfect. Everybody wants their life to look perfect, whether it is or not, right?
Which, we can talk all day about social media. It's really a double-edged sword because, for one, it makes you feel worse about your life, and that creates a void inside that, this discomfort that you want to numb. Oh, and then by the way, social media itself is also very addictive. They use a lot of what they know about addiction and about tying people into things or hooking people's attention. A lot of the social media apps are all designed by what they learned about gambling and slot machines and how do you make slot machines more addictive and more engaging. Well, they use a lot of that same science and understanding to develop the social media apps. So here we are, we're struggling because of our perception of our life against what we see on social media, which creates a void. Oh, and then thank goodness this app is here to fill that void. So it becomes a very negative cycle.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And when you think of some of the struggles that we have, like you said, the veterans changing from what they know to in the military to now civilian life, but also like if you have, for example, if you have somebody like a parent or a caregiver, and now the child is grown or whatever, then trying to find out who they are again. All these challenges, and it kind of, like you say, how do I connect? How do I live and exist in the world? That can be very troubling, and you don't know what to do, right?
Absolutely. Because as we go through life, like we meet our basic needs in a certain way, in a certain context, and we develop our sense of identity in the situation that we're at. And anytime we go through a major transition, whether that's losing a loved one, whether that's being an empty nester, your kids are grown, whether that's moving from college into the workforce, whether that's transitioning out of the military, or for people that are employed, whether that's changing jobs, changing cities, we have these basic needs for connection. And anytime that we disrupt that, then it creates this challenge. And I think it really opens the door for some of these challenging substances and behaviors to roll in.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's so important because people don't realize that these are addictive behaviors, and that's just kind of thrown around all the time. Oh, I'm addicted to shop. I'm a shopaholic. I'm a workaholic. And nobody thinks that, this can lead to other addictions, or this behavior is just as bad.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And that's, yeah, certainly. And that's a point there to, kind of looking through this lens of what Dr. Mate talks about. So my belief is that there's no substance or behavior that's good or bad. Now, somebody's relationship with it might be good or bad. So anything that might seem benign or socially acceptable, it's the person's relationship with it that determines whether or not it's problematic. Somebody can, can do any activity, any behavior, any habit, and for one individual, it might be very destructive to their life, and all the people around them, it's not as destructive. The question comes back to, what is that individual's relationship with it? Is this thing something that they're now relying on in order to reduce pain or relieve pain, or to, fill a void inside of them? And whether that's social media, whether that's TV, whether that's shopping, whether that's, riding your bike, like let's look at somebody, maybe for 100 people it's very healthy. For one individual, they're really struggling and suffering with their life, and they get on their bike and they just ride to get away from the pain that they're feeling, while creating more negative consequences in their life. Maybe it's preventing them from getting an education or going to work or showing up and cultivating relationships with their family. At the end of the day, it's what's that individual's relationship from it, what are they getting from it, and what is it costing them?
Oh, that's such a good point, that there's no good or bad things or substances or anything. And yes, I definitely believe that too. Um, so what do you have in mind that maybe our listeners can do to kind of combat, if they do notice that they're having a little more of an addictive problem or a little more of a habit drawing them towards something, do you have any kind of strategies or techniques to help?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, just having an awareness and doing a little bit of an inventory of things that show up commonly in your life, and then trying to question or come to a realization of what is it I'm trying to get? What is it trying to provide me? So, and again, this can be applied to anything that we're doing. So I remember a time a number of years ago where I was supposed to have my daughter on a Friday night. We had some plans. I think we were going to go see a dinner and a movie. And at the last minute, she had an invitation to go to a sleepover. So I dropped her off. And then all of a sudden, I felt like this feeling inside of me. And I, started sending text messages to friends like, okay, what's going on tonight? Like maybe there's something else I can get into. And when nobody responded, all of a sudden I had this urge to go get a big chocolate milkshake and to try to find a cigar somewhere that I could smoke. So and then, fortunately with a little bit of awareness or curiosity about what was going on, I realized, oh, there's an insecurity that's challenged inside of me. There's this little voice that likes to live deep inside of me that just said like, nobody cares about you. Nobody's texting you back. You have no real friends and nobody wants to connect with you. And these cravings that have come up or these thoughts that have come up, like that's a way to soothe that discomfort inside. Now, I'm not trying to say that you should never go drink a big milkshake. And if you like to smoke a cigar, then do that, but be aware of what's drawing you to do that. So if we can, as we have these urges or cravings, because anything that we engage in, there's so many things that we can do that are healthy at 99% of the time or 99% of the context. But sometimes if we realize that we're reaching for something and we can be in touch with where did this sudden craving come from, then that can be very illuminating. That can help us better address or understand the relationship that we're having with different substances and behaviors. And again, so that night I went and I got a big milkshake, and I was fine with that. And I woke up the next morning and I wasn't harboring any judgment against myself. But that awareness there, I think, was something that helped me see some of the behaviors in my life, better understand it, and then also have some compassion for myself. Like, okay, this is the experience that you had. This is the little gremlin that came up. This is the insecurity that was poked at a little bit. And you responded the way that you could. That's another message I always like to share. And as much as I share it, I'm reminding myself at the same time that any behavior or anything that somebody does, I believe that we are doing the best that we can at the time with the tools, the awareness, the resources, the level of energy that we have. So anything that we've done in the past that was a means or a mechanism to heal some, to fill a void or to relieve some pain, maybe we have some regret over that. Maybe we have some self-judgment over that. But I believe truly that at that time, we were doing the best that we could with all available resources and the energy and the awareness that we had. So if nothing else, just giving ourselves a little bit of grace, realizing that we were doing the best that we could in the past. That doesn't mean we have to continue certain behaviors or repeat certain habits. But we did the best that we could in the past, and now we can grow, we can gain new awareness, we can learn some new skills, and we can find better ways to navigate in the future.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I think one thing that you said was that ask and I think all the time people need to be more curious about themselves and they have to be willing to learn and willing to be truthful with themselves, right? And I think we don't for myself, I was just going through life and just go, 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 go all the time. And I never stopped to think of why I did things, why I like things, all these different things. And then when I finally started to slow down a little bit, I began to ask myself that. And especially when I got into therapy, my therapist was like, just find out about yourself. Because she would ask me questions and I'd say, I don't know. That would be my answer. I don't know. And I think that's a lot of the population, right? If we just stop and get curious and ask ourselves, like you said, we'll understand ourselves a lot better.
That's certainly, and kind of get ahead of some behaviors before they do become more problematic or have better, understanding. So a lot of the work I've been doing recently is as an addiction recovery coach. So I work with people in a non-clinical nature and a non-clinical setting and just help them get better connected to themselves. And I think one of the biggest barriers that we see with people, they say that of every 10 individuals that struggles with addiction, only 1 in 10 will ever reach out for help. The rest are afraid, they don't know where to go, or there's some other barrier there. And I think one of the biggest barriers is just the amount of judgment and shame that they either will face or that they fear they will face if they were to go kind of go down that route. So as a recovery coach and a kind of coming at supporting individuals from a different perspective, um, that's my focus, is to help people get in touch with why they feel this need to avoid or escape. And one simple exercise, when we kind of just talk through it, is just doing a cravings assessment. So the next time that you feel a certain craving or an urge come up, just stop for a moment and think like, okay, what's going on right now? Why am I feeling this thing? If I notice every day when I go home that I have this huge craving or this huge urge to do something, what is it that I'm facing? Is there something inside of me that I've been avoiding because I could focus on work, and now I have to go and feel the reality of the situation I'm contending with? Is there something about your home life? Is there something about your situation at home that makes you uncomfortable, and that's where this craving comes from? Because I think if we can be more in touch with that, then it helps us kind of follow that line back to like, okay, where's the source of this pain? Where's this insecurity, the source of discomfort? And then that can be very illuminating. And doing it, as a recovery coach, my point is never like, don't ever follow through on that craving, that urge. Let's take the first step and just help understand it. And if you understand, okay, I hate my home life and that's why I have this urge. I'm not saying, well, don't ever go home and have that cocktail that you're craving, but let's understand what that thing is. And let's start trying to put the pieces together and fill that hole and address some of those core challenges so that it can reduce those cravings, or at least put you in a place where you have the willpower or the discipline to avoid certain situations. And many times that is finding other healthy things that we can replace that time with. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. And this is one thing I always share is that, I understand there's 23, 24 million adults in America right now that are struggling with some form of addiction. I understand that's 24 million different circumstances or life paths that got somebody to that place. And one thing I always like to remind people of is there's not one or 10 or even 100 pathways out of that darkness. There might be 24 million unique pathways. And that's what I encourage everybody is, if you're in a place or you're experiencing something in your life that you don't like and you want to change it, you've got to find the right pathway for you to get out of that. And if you've tried some things in the past and it hasn't taken, or it didn't really work, or it didn't feel like it was right for you, that's not a signal back to you that you're just so messed up that you can't get better. That's a signal that that wasn't the right pathway. And you just, you can get to the destination, you got to find another street.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And that's one thing I've found is that, some people just get so discouraged and then they just quit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you have anything that you could say maybe encouraging to our listeners if
Yeah.
they're
So one phrase that I love is,
discouraged?
one phrase that I love is focus on the gain, not on the gap. And I don't know where that I first heard that, but it's something that really resonates with me. And this is the challenge that I see with a lot of people that have struggled with addiction. It's our human nature. We have a natural negativity bias. It's our human nature in our attempt to avoid threats that we focus a lot more on things that are negative, whether that's negative aspects of us, failures, mistakes that we've made in the past. Unfortunately, when our natural inclination is to focus on those things, that doesn't make us feel great about us. If we can focus instead on the gain with some intention, with some accountability, with some coaching, with some support, but instead focus on the gain, then this helps prepare us for that next obstacle or challenge. And what this might look like, maybe somebody's been in recovery and they've been abstinent, or they've refrained from a substance or behavior for 30 days, and then they have a return to use. Well, our mind is going to tell us like, okay, you're so defective, you're so messed up, things are never going to get better. And they're going to start repeating or making us believe any negative thing that we either heard somebody else say about us or we thought somebody else was saying about us. And this just erodes our sense of worth, our sense of confidence, and really makes it harder to continue that journey. If instead we can focus on the gain, like, okay, I had a return to use yesterday, but damn if 29 days before that I didn't have a return to use. So there's something that I demonstrated and exhibited there. Let me focus on those 29 days because that's going to help carry me forward in this journey. If I only focus on that one day, then that's not going to prepare me for that next step.
Oh, that's really nice. Looking at the positive instead of the negative. But sometimes that's so difficult.
It is.
And what would you suggest, or is there anything you can suggest that maybe we can do to help us if we're stuck? Sometimes you're just stuck so far into that negativity. Do you have any ideas of how we could climb out a little bit more?
Yeah, certainly. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. And as I mentioned, we have our natural tendencies, our focus and our feelings are going to tend in a natural direction if we don't take some intention and do some things to kind of change the tide. So one of my favorite quotes is by Jim Rohn. He says, "You can't change the destination overnight, but you can change the direction." So maybe we don't, chart out a whole new path for our journey moving forward, but maybe we can just shift 2 or 3 degrees to the right. If you look at what the significance of a 2 degree shift can have in your life over a period of time, that's a tremendous change that you can experience in your life. Because the reality is, whatever the darkest place that we're in and the depths that we're in, we didn't get there in one day or in a month or in a year. This is probably a long journey that unfolded for decades for most people. So not focusing on trying to change or trying to accelerate our journey out of that path. If it took you decades to get into it, it doesn't have to take you decades to get out, but it's also not going to be a day. It's not going to be a week. It's not going to be a month. It's going to be a longer journey out of that. So focusing just on changing that direction, looking at those small wins. And there's a lot of things that we can do either with, personally or with coaching, with support, to start to make some little tiny shifts in our thought processes and in the way that we show up to make us more resilient, to give us a little bit more muscle to overcome some of those habits that we've developed. One of the things, and I wasn't, I don't know if I mentioned sharing this, but something that I've created as a resource for a lot of the veterans that I work with. If you're not a veteran, don't worry. It really is powerful and very helpful for anybody. But I've got a program. It's called the Warrior Reset, and I'll give free access to any of your listeners that want to check that out. You can simply go to thewarriorreset.com. And what that will provide you is, over the last 10 years, these are 4 daily practices or 4 exercises that we can go through. It takes less than 15 minutes a day, but it's really about making those small shifts in our mindset and our perspective and developing that resilience from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective, and in some cases, even a spiritual hold on, help me out with this one. Spiritual perspective. There we go. Spiritual perspective to help us develop that resilience. And some of it can come down to just doing a simple thing. Like one of the first exercises I'll do with anybody I'm coaching is, I want you to make a list of 100 wins and successes that you've had in your life. And the normal response that I get is deer in the headlights. They're like, "What are you talking about? I'm 40. I haven't had 100 wins and successes in my life." Well, first, that's a litmus test to me of how bad of a place that they're in. But it's also an opportunity to, I don't care how many mistakes you've made in your life. I don't care if you're 15 years old, you've had thousands of wins and successes in your life, especially if we give ourselves credit for a win that's of equal magnitude or equal significance of some mistake that we're going to hold over ourselves for the next couple of weeks. So I don't care how old you are, sit down and make a list of wins and successes that you've had in your life. This is the first little thing that you can do to start to shift that perspective and see the value that you have, and not just harbor all these judgments and fears about who you are and the insecurities, the weaknesses that you have.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Like replacing the negative with the positive.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good.
Well, and it's not even trying to, we're not trying to negate negative thoughts or negative judgments about us. It's not like, okay, we're not trying to say that those things aren't real or invalidate them. I mean, you can do that work and there's a process for that. But let's at least even out the playing field a little bit and bring in some awareness to some good things about us to kind of balance the scale out a little bit. And simply writing 100 wins and successes you've had, even if you got to say, all right, I learned how to crawl, learn how to walk, learn how to read, learn how to ride a bike, learn how to ride a skateboard, got an A on that test in first grade, like whatever those things are, let's start making a list of it, because this will help start to balance out your self-esteem or your estimate of yourself and your perspective, so that you can be more open to and give yourself a little bit more grace for the hard challenge ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do like that. And it's all personal, right? And it's all individualized. It's different. There's no like one set way to do things. Right. And I think that people don't understand that. We like to paint with a broad brush and say, this is going to work, but it doesn't work for everybody, right?
Right. And that's a big disservice that we have, in this addiction industry or the treatment industry, is people saying like, "Oh, I did this and this helped me, so you got to do this. And if you don't do this, that just means you don't want it enough." And it's like, "Oh, come on, that's absurd and that's ridiculous." And it's really more harmful than helpful to somebody who might also try that thing and doesn't experience the same results as you. Again, this comes back to 34 million different pathways into the darkness. There's going to be not just one or 100 or 1,000 pathways out of it. And the challenge with that is, and this is really why I cut so deep. So say you do find a specific program or follow a certain protocol and that helps you. Well, if somebody else, if they actually buy into your belief that that's the only pathway out and they try it and they fail or they don't get the same results, then you just took somebody who's in a very bad emotional place and has very low self-esteem and you just took them down a notch. How is that helping anybody else?
Right. Definitely. And I feel like in society now, we're kind of like in this instant gratification mode.
Mhm.
So we want to have something big and a big bang, and that's going to fix everything
Yeah.
tomorrow, and we don't understand that little, like you said, little shifts make such a difference when they add up.
Absolutely. I mean, I was a pilot in the Marine Corps, so I often think about the analogy of flying a plane. So if I took off here in North Carolina and I was flying to San Francisco and I was on the perfect heading to get me right to San Francisco, well, if I wasn't paying attention and I drifted off just 1 degree or 2 degrees, I'm not showing up in San Francisco. I'm down in LA. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's hundreds of miles off course. So we can benefit from the same reality in any small shifts that we can make. You don't have to redefine your entire life today, but just find one small thing that you can do to make one small shift. If you're frustrated with your health, it doesn't mean you have to start running 10 miles a week right now to get back into better shape. But if you haven't done push-ups or crunch or stretched in 5 years, then spend 5 minutes stretching today. You've just made a small shift in the better direction. And to your point about the instant gratification, yeah, this is a big challenge that gets a lot of people in trouble that are trying to progress in their recovery journey, because maybe you're in your 30s or 40s and maybe you're in a really bad place and you start to make some progress and you're like, all right, I got to get back to where I should be. And I want it to happen now in the next, 30 days. So they start piling, too many things on them and then feel overwhelmed, where they get frustrated because their whole life hasn't transformed in just 30 days or in 1 year. And then they get discouraged and they fall back to a bad place. And I've also seen the opposite be true. I've also seen people when their life does start to get better, but they haven't worked on their sense of self-worth and validated the worth that they have, then they can be self-destructive and sabotage their progress and their growth because they've spent so many years in chaos, so many years in an uncomfortable situation that they become familiar and comfortable there. Now chaos is their zone of comfort. And as things start to settle down and progress in their life, like, that's too much. I don't understand this. And then the gremlins of our self-doubt and limited self-worth come in and says, I know how to get back to where I was comfortable. Let me just mess something up. Not that they're intentionally saying this or doing this, but now they're getting into arguments. They're losing their job. Or other behaviors kind of creep in and create destruction in their life and stop their progress because they got to a place where they weren't comfortable. And this is really where I advocate for either finding a friend, finding a supportive partner, finding a recovery coach, finding anybody that you can work with that can be there to help you in this journey, so that as you start to get uncomfortable, when things get better, they can be there to encourage you, to remind you of the value that you have, to remind you to focus on the gain, not on the gap, and focus on the things that are true about you. Because I don't care how much you've messed up or how many mistakes you've made in your life, you are lovable and deserving of happiness just as you are. And for many people that have been in a dark place, we forget that. And it takes a while to remember that again. So having somebody there that can remind you of that could be that thing that helps you get out of that place.
Yes, yes, definitely. And, so many people, like you say, feel unloved or unworthy. And sometimes we get in our own way.
Mhm.
We just, oh, I don't think I deserve happiness. So therefore, subconsciously, we're going to sabotage ourselves
Right.
when it comes to being happy or opportunities that present ourselves. Do you find that in your line of work, the self
Yeah,
sabotage?
absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so common. I mean, it's almost we expect it, and this is us kind of getting ahead of that wave and not doing the work along the way to regain that sense of self-worth that we had. And if you're not spending, like, if you're sitting down and you're doing step work all the time and you're not also sitting down and looking at those wins and successes, or identifying your strengths and recognizing how you used your innate strengths to navigate the day, then our mind is hardwired for preservation. That means it's all of our attention is going to come back on those mistakes that we made and on the things that we've done in the past and on the regret and on the remorse and on the sense of guilt. Like, that's what's going to define us and define the perspective or define the lens through which we look at our life. it's critical to do that work along the way. Start out by giving yourself credit for little things. One of the things that's most powerful that I've experienced, and anybody that goes and checks out the Warrior Reset, this is one of the things I share in there. It's a simple mirror exercise. So it's a quick 30-second, 1 minute inventory that we do at the end of the day, giving ourselves credit for anything that we did well and any temptations maybe that we avoided. This is so valuable because if we don't do something like this or have this constant reminder reminding us of the value and the worth that we have, then the only thing that we're going to do is fall back to our default, which is, let me think about all the mistakes that I made because I want to make sure that I don't repeat these things in the future. These could be future threats to that connection. We talked about how valuable that connection is. If I keep making these mistakes, then I might jeopardize that connection and jeopardize my sense of safety and well-being. So let me not make those mistakes. So what does that mean? We're opening up all these tabs in our mind, on our browser in our mind. We're opening up all these tabs of all these bad things about us. And of course, you're going to feel terrible about yourself. Of course, you're going to think that you don't deserve more happiness, more success, more joy in your life. So when you do start to experience it, like, all right, I'm going to get ahead of this and I'm just going to sabotage this growth and I'm going to remove this happiness from my life because I don't deserve it, because that's where our mind is. So it's so important to, certainly mitigate some of the negative effects of us. It's certainly important for those that are in a 12-step program to do that step work and to try to remove some of those things that are bad, or, the defects that we have or some of the weaknesses that we have, try to remedy that. But if we're not also doing something to build our sense of self-worth up at the same time, then your journey, if possible, is going to be much harder than it has to be.
That's right. Yeah. My therapist always says that you have to lay a firm foundation so you can build on it. And
right.
And that foundation takes so long to build sometimes, especially when you've been broken for so long. Mm-hmm. Right?
Certainly. And that's why having some peers, having some other people that have been on a similar journey, even if they're 10 steps ahead of you, then that can be a great support to help move through that. And with your analogy there of building that foundation, I often think of the garden. Like, yeah, so we want a big, beautiful, flourishing garden. We're going to have to go in there and pull out some weeds and pull out some roots so that we can have a garden. But if we're not planting new seeds and we're not fertilizing it, not putting water and sunshine on it, then all we're doing is like, we're going to create this little mud pit. And that's what I see a lot of people doing. If all they're doing is focusing on trying to remove bad things from their life, it's like, okay, now you've got what? You've got maybe you got no weeds left, but all you got's dirt. You still don't, and you don't have a garden. You don't have the new roots from the new flowers and the new trees to kind of hold that earth together. So all you're left with is this feeling of yuck or of mud.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to get more out of the idea that addiction is because whatever we're addicted to is there, and get into the underlying condition that is putting us there. And
because that's another thing that we see all the time is just replacement addiction. So you got all these people celebrating how many days or years it's been since they had a drink, but now they're sitting there and consuming all of these other things that are still addictive behaviors. Now, granted, maybe their life is a lot better because these new addictions don't have the same negative repercussions that their old ones did. But if you're not getting to the root of that, if you're not trying to fill that void and cure or heal the pain, then you're not. I mean, I'm not judging anybody's journey in recovery. Like, as long as you're experiencing everything you want in your life, then I'll celebrate that. And here's to you. But if you're not experiencing that and you feel stuck, and this is what happens to a lot of people, they're like, what happened? I removed alcohol from my life. I stopped using opioids. Why didn't everything change? It's because if you still have that pain inside and you're still finding other maladaptive coping mechanisms to deal with it, then you're not allowing yourself to experience that growth and for things to actually improve.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. I couldn't agree more. But now I've noticed that there's not always empathy for people that are addicted to something. That people tend to think that, oh, they just want that high, or they just want that this or that, But can you say anything to our listeners that maybe they have a friend or a loved one or even themselves and they don't fully understand addiction, but could you tell us something so that maybe they can have empathy to that other person that's in their life so they can help understand what they're going through?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. It's something I think we need to talk about more. So the other sage advice that I got that's really formed my understanding of addiction and a lot of the work that I do, also from Dr. Gabor Mate, is he says that when we think about or we talk about addiction, there's all this talk about why the addiction. Or like, why does Sally continue to drink after she's had 2 DWIs? Why does Jim continue to use opioids after he's, lost his marriage, lost his health, lost his job? If all we do is focus on why the addiction, then it's really hard to come to kind of any understanding that's not more judgmental of this individual. He keeps turning back to this thing that is destroying their lives. If instead we can bring a new lens to the question or to this inquiry and ask why the pain. So if addiction manifests in any behavior that temporarily relieves pain, well, then why the pain? And if we can look at it through that lens and try to understand what this person is suffering through that is creating such a need to escape, then I think this in and of itself can provide a little bit more compassion and empathy. And this is something I often do when I'm talking with, I run a recovery residence, I do recovery coaching, and I talk with a lot of individuals who are struggling. And if ever I feel that sensation of like judgment or frustration starting to boil up, then what I do is I look for the child inside of them that had that first instance, that first trauma, that first violation, that first thing that occurred that separated from them from that authentic path and led them down this road where they felt like they had to hide all the time or hide something about themselves. And when I can do that, then I can look at a 40-year-old person that's struggling and exhibiting behaviors that are frustrating. And I can look at the 8-year-old that's inside of him or the 10-year-old that's inside of him and realize like there's a human in there that's just trying to survive. And they can't deal with they don't have the capacity to deal with the amount of pain that's shown up in their life. Yes, maybe some of that pain or a lot of that pain came from their relationship with the addictive behavior, but they're just an individual that's trying to not feel pain, and they're doing the best they can. This comes back to, if we're going to give ourselves grace and recognize that we did the best that we could at the time with the resources and the skills and the awareness that we had, we got to offer that to everybody else as well, because that's the reality. Nobody chooses to struggle with addiction. People choose not to feel pain. And unfortunately, sometimes people are in a place where a substance or behavior is introduced to them, and the relief that they get from that pain is something that they then become addicted to or they rely on. It's just meeting a basic need that we have. It's a basic need for survival. Nobody wants to feel pain. And when we do, we'll reach for something, or we can develop this habit of reaching for something external to us. And I think anybody can go down that path. We often say or think, talk about, if I was to experience some of the things that they did, and this is something I really see when people start sharing their stories, when you really hear about the journeys that these individuals have been on and some of the heartache that they felt and some of the pain and some of the rejection that they've been through, it's almost hard not to come to the conclusion, well, of course you're addicted to the substance or behavior. Like, how could you not be when you hear about some of these stories? And for every individual, it's going to look different. For every individual, there's something that really like created a wound inside that they've been battling against forever. And unfortunately, for some people, when they're in that place, they engage in or they're introduced to something that helps heal that pain, or then becomes that habitual thing that they need in order to survive. And for some individuals, they're introduced to something, maybe one person reaches for a milkshake and good for them. It doesn't, it's not something that disrupts their life overnight. And whereas another person might have introduced something else to them, or people go through those transitions, or they'll go through a shift in their life. Maybe they had the emotional resilience and that foundation that this one thing wasn't easing some pain that's inside of them. I look at a lot of veterans that have had maybe an unhealthy or an uncommon relationship with alcohol or with other substances, but agree that it does after they transition out, where they become over reliant on it. So there was this substance that was a normal part of their life, which hadn't taken over their life. But once they lost that foundation for the sense of connection, that sense of authenticity, and the sense of meaning that was provided to them, when they lose that foundation, now all of a sudden that thing those hooks, kind of take hold. And I think this is, I wish more people would understand this about that pathway into addiction, or what that struggle looks like, because we can blame a substance, we can blame a behavior, but it's not that. As I said, I don't think any substance or behavior is good or bad. I don't think opioids are good or bad. Yes, it leads a lot of people to struggles with addiction. We also use them every single day in medical and hospitals around the world. Alcohol, I don't think it's good or bad. Yes, a lot of people struggle with it and it creates chaos in their life, but we also use it in many other instances in many other ways. It's not the substance or behavior, it's the person's relationship to that substance or behavior.
Yeah. And I think if we just become a little more human, a little more curious, and dive in deep, mm-hmm. because I think a lot of people just have surface relationships, mm-hmm. and it's just like, hey, how you like? for example, when you go down the sidewalk or whatever, and everybody's like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" They don't really want to know. They
Right.
just You're supposed to just say, "Oh, good, how are you?"
Right.
Even if something terrible just happened to you, and I just feel like that's just the way we are. But if we actually dive deep and take a moment to understand each other, that would help.
That's an experience anybody can do, or an experiment anybody can do. I encourage you, next time you're at a restaurant or you're at a checkout counter, whether it's at the gas station or the coffee shop, and somebody, asks, "What can I do for you?" or "How are you doing?" Stop and make eye contact with that person and say something nice to them, or say something in recognition. A lot of times I'll walk in and just say, "Hi, how are you?" And I'll wait for a response and wait for an answer. And it catches a lot of people off guard, but then you feel that moment of connection and, and start to get some of the benefits of that. But it's a really strange experience to have in the beginning. But it's a beautiful thing to experience. And the more that we can do that, then the more we can feel that even momentary sense of connection with others. So we don't all feel like we're just floating around.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, Garrett, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about this. And it's such a deep conversation and important for us to have. So you're a recovery coach. How would someone be able to find you if they're interested more in learning about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way. So Garrett Biss, I'm the only one that's on there. If anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about what I do or about what recovery coaching is, but you don't want to reach out, well, go check out that Warrior Reset. You can have a little bit of an experience for yourself, and that's whether you've ever struggled with a substance behavior or not. If you're ever at a place in your life where you feel like you need a little fine tune or a little adjustment, or you want to take the next step or get to the next level, then that can be a very powerful way to help. I encourage anybody, you try it, do it every day for 10 days, and then see what the results are. And I'm happy to come back here anytime, or just chat with you offline anytime you want to have a conversation. But especially if you get any questions or any feedback from any of the listeners, and you want to dig more deeply into something, I'm more than happy to do it.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Garrett. And we've really enjoyed you being with us.
I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. And to all our listeners, this is Revive and Rise. And just remember that you don't have to struggle alone.